It was the winter of 1850, 7 years after leaving the position of President of the Republic of Texas. I, Sam Houston, was traveling west of the territory to evaluate the conditions of small border communities that emerged as mushrooms after rain since annexation to the United States. The government in Washington needed reliable reports about these new villages, and my experience and reputation qualified me for such a task. It was during this journey that I arrived at Whispering Creek, a village that was not even in the official maps, nestled between mountains in what is today west of Texas. At first glance, it looked like a typical border city: the dusty main street, some stores, a small bank, a modest church, and, of course, a saloon. What caught my attention was the silence. Even at noon, the streets were practically deserted. I tied my horse in front of the only hotel in town and was greeted by a middle-aged man with deep dark circles and trembling hands. "Welcome to Whispering Creek, Lord," he said, nervously looking at the sky, though they still missed the sunset. "Room for one night?" "Maybe more," I said. "I'm Sam Houston. I am at the service of the government, evaluating the conditions of the border communities." Hearing my name, the man, who introduced himself as Jeremiah Wells, owner of the hotel, seemed momentarily impressed, but soon the nervousness returned. "You chose a moment complicated to visit our city, Mr. Houston. And why would it be?" I asked as I signed the book of records. Wells hesitated, looking over my shoulder to the window, as if I expected to see something threatening. "I don't know if I should talk about it. People might think I'm crazy." He lowered his voice. "But considering who you are, there is something wrong with this city, Mr. Houston. Something that started 3 months ago when that damn pianist arrived." While taking me to the room, Wells told the story. A man named Sebastian Gray appeared in the city in September, carrying only one suitcase and a sheet music case. He was a talented pianist who soon got a job in the Golden Fortune, the only salon in town. His music was extraordinary and melancholy, hypnotic, unlike anything that the local residents had already heard. "It was as if he put magic in each note," explained Wells. "People who never frequented saloons started to appear every night just to hear him play. Gray has become instantly popular, but also mysterious. He never talked about his past, never socialized after his presentations. Always the first to arrive and the last to leave, often practicing alone after Saloon closed. Everything changed the night that Thomas Blackwood, owner of Saloon, discovered Gray stirring on the floorboards under the piano. There was a heated discussion. Witnesses said Gray was shouting on completing the cycle and feeding what is hungry. The next morning, Sebastian Gray was found dead, stabbed multiple times, his fallen body on the piano. Blackwood had disappeared, presumably fleeing after the murder. "We thought the story would end there," Wells said, his voice now almost a whisper. But then, the song started. Just at midnight, a week after the murder, Saloon's piano started playing alone. The same amazing melody Gray used to perform. Initially, people assumed that someone was preaching a macabre piece. But when a group entered Saloon, they found the piano playing with no one to the commands. "We thought it was Gray's ghost," continued Wells, "and restless spirit seeking revenge. But then people began to disappear. The first was the bartender who had witnessed the discussion between Gray and Blackwood. It was found the next morning, sitting in a chair before the piano, with an empty look, without responding to any stimulus, like an empty shell. For the next 2 months, 4 more people suffered the same destination. They had all entered Saloon at midnight, attracted to mysterious music. Now we are all locked at home after dusk," concluded Wells. "No one dares to pass near the Golden Fortune when he darkens. The sheriff sent messages asking for help, but we are too isolated. No one has come to the Lord." The story was too fantastic to be believed, but Wells's fears seemed genuine. I decided to investigate personally. I spent the rest of the day talking to the few residents I met on the streets. All confirmed the story of Wells, adding details about the hypnotic music that leaked through the saloon windows abandoned every night at midnight. I also visited the victims, 5 people in a catatonic state, cared for by desperate family members. His eyes were open, but no light of conscience seemed to dwell those bodies. They were alive in technical sense only as their hearts beat, their lungs breathed, but their minds, their souls, they seemed to have left. As the sun was put, the city was already completely deserted. I locked myself in the hotel room as Wells had insisted, but not to sleep. I was determined to observe the saloon from my window, which had a direct view of the Golden Fortune across the street. Just before midnight, I lit a lamp and positioned myself by the window. Saloon was dark and silent, its properties of properties, the windows like empty eyes staring at the deserted street. When the small watch on the bedside table scored midnight, it happened. First, a weak glow emanated from Saloon's windows, not the yellow lamp light, but a bluish, unnatural shine. Then the song started. Even through the hotel's closed window, I was able to hear the notes clearly. It's a complex, melancholy melody, played with impossible technical perfection. The notes seemed to float in the night air, hovering like fog, penetrating not only my ears, but my whole being. It was beautifully hypnotic. Without realizing it, I found myself moving toward the bedroom door, as if my body responded to a call that my conscious mind did not fully understand. Fortunately, years of military discipline and self-discipline allowed me to recover control. I forced myself to return to the window, fighting the almost irresistible impulse to cross the street. It was then that I saw the woman. Leaving a nearby house, he walked slowly toward Saloon, as if in a trance. I recognized her as the black man's young wife, with whom she had talked briefly that afternoon. His face was serene, almost beatific, as he followed the music as he pulled by invisible ropes. I ran down the stairs and to the street, calling your name, Mrs. Parker. But she didn't show any sign of listening to me. I reached her when I was already climbing the saloon steps. Mrs. Parker, stop. I grabbed her arm, but she fought with surprising force. I need to get in, the eyes fixed on the gates of Saloon. He's calling. It's so beautiful. I had to use all my strength to prevent her from moving forward. As we fought, a movement on the gates of the Wyden caught my attention. For a moment, just a brief moment, I thought I saw a lean and pale figure watching us from inside the saloon. Not the pianist's ghost, as residents believed, but something different, something inhuman. Finally managed to drag Mrs. Parker back to the hotel, where Wells welcomed us with shock and relief. We need to tie it to a chair because it continued to try to escape toward the music that was still floating around the city. Gradually, as the time advanced, the melody decreased and finally ceased around 1 a.m. Mrs. Parker fell into deep sleep. When he woke up the next morning, he had no memory of the incident. That first night in Whispering Creek convinced me that something truly supernatural was happening. During my years with the Cherokee, I had learned that there are strengths in the world beyond the understanding of civilized men, ancient entities that inhabit the spaces between our world and other planes of existence. I decided to face the mystery directly. I spent the next day researching the history of Saloon. Golden Fortune had been built on the ruins of an old indigenous meeting place, a place where, according to reports, shamans performed rituals to communicate with spirits. I also found that several inexplicable accidents and deaths occurred during their construction 7 years earlier. More notably, I found that Gray was not the first pianist to play at Saloon. There were 3 before him, all traveling foreigners who remained for short periods and departed abruptly. What caught my attention was a detail repeated by different sources. Each pianist who worked in the Golden Fortune eventually began to play the same disturbing melody that now sounded at midnight. I visited Saloon during the day when sinister music was silent. The interior was exactly as it had left, tables and chairs still positioned, half-empty bottles in the bar, as if everyone had hurriedly left. The piano occupied a small stage in the corner, an imposing instrument of dark wood imported from Europe, they told me. Examining the piano more closely, I noticed strange brands carved discreetly on the sides, symbols that I recognized from my studies of native cultures. They were old, predating the arrival of the Europeans, related to the rituals of the imprisonment of spirits. More significant was what I found when I removed some floorboards under the piano, where Gray had been seen stirring the night of his death. There was a cavity on the ground, deeper than the foundation of the building, coming down in the darkness. And on the walls of this opening, more symbols were carved on the earth itself. I returned to the hotel and consulted some books I carried on my trips, including notes on indigenous legends I had collected during my time with the Cherokee. What I discovered froze in my blood. The symbols belonged to an old ritual designed to imprison an entity known as the Hungry, a being of the depths that fed on human souls. According to legend, the entity could be contained by a circle of specific symbols, but needed to be periodically fed with voluntary sacrifices to remain numb. It was a common practice among certain tribes to build meeting places on such ritual arrests, where shamans performed ceremonies to appease the trapped creature. When the European settlers arrived, many of these sacred places were desecrated or destroyed, the containment rituals forgotten. He believed he found the truth about golden fortune. Saloon had been built on the arrest of one of these old entities. Somehow the piano had become a conduit, perhaps due to its position directly on the cavity, or perhaps because of some mystical aspect of its construction. And the pianist Gray and his predecessors had been influenced by the entity, led to touch the specific melody that weakened the barrier between the worlds and hypnotized potential victims, attracting them to voluntary sacrifice. Gray probably discovered the truth and tried to complete some ritual to strengthen the prison, complete the cycle, as witnesses heard him. Blackwood, perhaps already under the influence of the entity, killed him to prevent it. Now, without a human intermediary, the entity was playing the instrument directly, attracting victims to feed on its souls, leaving only empty shells behind. With these disturbing conclusions, I returned to the hotel to prepare for the night. If it were correct, it would need to face a supernatural force whose nature barely understood. I visited the small local church and borrowed some holy water and a crucifix, not because they would have an effect on a pre-Christian entity, but as a precaution. More importantly, I took her herbs and objects that the Cherokee taught me to use against evil spirits, consecrated tobacco, sage, and a small leather bag containing animal bones and other substances whose purpose was never completely explained to me. I also took my reliable Colt Patterson pistol, more for my comfort than for believing in its effectiveness against the supernatural. Just before midnight, I positioned myself outside Saloon, having instructed Wells to lock all the hotel doors and not let anyone go, regardless of what they heard. When the church clock hit midnight, the song started again. Even prepared, I felt his hypnotic attraction and almost physical compulsion to enter Saloon and approach the piano. Resisting the call, I pushed the shuttle doors and entered. The interior was illuminated by the same anti-natural bluish shine he had seen the night before, emanating from his own piano. And there he was, playing alone, the keys moving as if pressured by invisible fingers. The melody intensified when I entered, becoming more insistent, almost angry. Fighting against the compulsion to approach myself, I began to recite the words of protection I had learned from an old Cherokee shaman, spreading the consecrated herbs in a circle around me. It was then that I saw him, not a ghost, as residents believed, but something much worse. A figure partially emerged from the opening under the piano, a vaguely humanoid form composed of darkness and pulsating bluish light. There was no defined face, just a suggestion of eyes and a mouth that opened far beyond what would be possible for any deadly creature. "I know what you are," he said, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to control her. "You have been imprisoned here a long time ago, and the rituals that kept it contained were forgotten." The creature did not respond with words, but the music changed, becoming a furious cacophony. I felt increasingly pressure on my mind, as if something tried to force entrance. "Pianists with their instruments," I continued, determined to keep the focus. "You influenced them to play your invocation song to attract souls to you." But Gray discovered the truth and tried to reinforce his prison. The creature issued a sound not through the air, but directly in my mind, a scream of fury and hunger that almost made me fall on my knees. Images were forced in my conscience, visions of infinite darkness, eternal hunger, and primordial hatred for all living things. I realized that I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding, an entity whose existence preceded humanity, imprisoned by the first shamans who found his well of darkness. The music reached a frantic growing, and the creature began to expand, extending beyond the boundaries of the piano toward me. I realized that my attempt to confront her directly had been foolish. I had no knowledge or power to destroy or imprison her again. But maybe he could deprive her of her conduit. With a quick movement, I took a small can of kerosene I had brought as a precaution and launched it against the piano. The flammable liquid spread over the carved instrument. I lit a match and threw it. The piano immediately burned down, the flames rising much higher and warmer than they should. The creature issued another mental cry of fury, and the song distorted itself into a demonic cacophony before ceased abruptly. The flames spread rapidly, consuming not only the piano, but the whole saloon with supernatural speed. As soon as I had time to escape to the street before the entire building was swallowed into hell. The residents left their homes, attracted by the flash of the fire. No one tried to erase it, as if everyone instinctively knew that the fire was necessary, purifying. While the golden fortune burned, I heard a last mental cry, not in anger, but of pain and relief. For a moment, I glimpsed not the hungry creature, but Sebastian Gray's face, his eyes finding mine through the flames before fading. In the morning, nothing left of Saloon plus smoked ashes. I supervised the excavation of the cavity under the ruins, and, with the help of the few Americans still living in the region, we performed an appropriate ritual to seal the opening permanently. Surprisingly, the 5 victims in a catatonic state awakened simultaneously as Saloon burned, confusing but completely recovered. None had memory of what had happened or where their minds had been during those empty months. I spent another week at Whispering Creek, helping to rebuild and ensuring that the seal in the cavity would remain intact. Before leaving, I warned the residents never to build again in that place, advice that, fortunately, followed. For years after that incident, I found reports of bewitched pianos and musicians possessed in other border cities. I investigated several of these cases, finding that some were mere superstitions, while others— well, let's just say that the hungry was not the only old entity imprisoned in the wild lands of America. This story does not appear in any book of history or official biography. Some secrets are too heavy for the public record. But I now share it as a warning that there are strengths in this world that we do not fully understand, hungry entities waiting in the empty spaces between musical notes, ready to devour unsuspecting souls attracted by their sinister song. And if ever, while traveling through a small, isolated town, you listen to music coming from an abandoned salon at midnight, keep walking. No matter how beautiful or tempting the melody, keep walking. Some songs were not made for deadly ears, and some musicians never intended to be among the living. Before we end this account, if you are visiting our channel for the first time, be sure to subscribe and activate the bell to receive notifications about our upcoming scary stories. Your support means a lot to us, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks.